mostly starting on time. I have a little bit of swag, so after the talk I have some t-shirts and Polymer stickers, and I don't want to carry them home, so see me after the talk. Hi, I'm Lloyd Cledwin. I work at McAllister College. I actually chuckled putting together this slide. I work on the business side of a nonprofit EDU. I volunteer for one of the largest for-profit corporations in the world, and I also teach for an academic institution. You can find me around town. So today we're going to go over a high level of, get my notes a little bit right size. Kind of a high level overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about web components and Polymer. So briefly, what are web components? So just so that everybody's on the same page, that's helpful. Okay. You know, as we're talking about a new technology, one of the things you want to think about are what are the problems that we're solving? What is it? There's a new solution, obviously, for some issues that we're feeling. So how are web components going to make it easier for us to do our jobs? Show of hands, who's a web developer? So most of the room, okay. So we're web developers. We've got a standard set of markup and tools that we use to get our job done. And we're expected for our apps to render well on kind of all devices that there are, irregardless of size, display, multi-screen. And we're smart. We're all really smart web developers, so we can do this, right? This is what we do. This is our profession. But it's work. So as an example, one of the things that we often do is put together a site with tabbed elements in it. Right? Lots of sites have tabs in them. This should be easy. It's 2015 already. It's actually kind of a pain in the butt. Depending on the technology you're using, if you're using Bootstrap, you end up opening your previous project or going out to the site and copying and pasting the template. And different solutions use different kind of tools to solve this. So here's Bootstrap, lots of HTML. There's ways to do it in HTML, mixing HTML and JavaScript. Some solutions just use JavaScript to enable tabs. Again, this is fine. This is just a pain that we accept as web developers nowadays, but it doesn't need to be. They're all kind of solving the same problem and doing it differently. Another pain that will come up as web developers is you can't often mix frameworks. So you've got one framework that does a really nice job of solving tabs, and you want to have there's a nice UI element in another one, and they don't play nicely together. So one of the nice things that web components will allow you to do is to use some of these best practices and pretty easily drop them onto your site. So there's a web component called, see all the same screens as easily. One of the Polymer elements is paper tabs, which allows us to pretty quickly to have a tabbed event, a tab page with nice look and feel, some ripple effect in there. And this is built on the web platform and mixable with other frameworks as well. So how's this possible? Well, this is all built off of web components. Engineers from the web browsers got together and realized that we're all kind of solving the same problem over and over again. And could we come up with a technology that would work to solve some of these pain points that we're feeling? So this is all built again off of web components, which really are kind of a quantum leap in web development. Now, I do want to take a second and differentiate between web components and Polymer. Google's a big proponent of open web standards. And there's the group I manage is the Google Developer Group, so we talk a lot about Google technologies. Google's a big push for web components. So there might be a construment that Google owns Web Components, and I want to make clear that that's not the case. It's part of the HTML5 spec. This is, it's a standard baked into any browser that's using the HTML5 spec today. And the HTML5 spec, as we all know, is part of the kind of modern web suite of development tools managed by the W3C, which is a consortium of all the browser makers. So what are web components? Well, there's 4 key things that make up web components. Maybe if I made this part bigger. I'm just going to talk to myself for a second. No, apparently not. All right. So there's 4 key parts that make up a web component. There's custom elements, HTML templates, the shadow DOM, and HTML imports. I'm going to talk briefly about what each of those mean. The custom elements allow us to kind of dynamically and on the page define a new element. So again, this is 2015, right? We're building web applications. HTML spec, the HTML element hasn't really kept up. This is an actual HTML, a web-based app that many of you probably are using today. This is, if you open your developer console, this is Gmail. It's kind of a mess behind the scenes of divs and nested divs. So one of the nice things that HTML or custom elements allow us to do is to create something that we could declare as an element like these paper tabs and define it somewhere and reuse it, kind of declare its use on the page throughout your application. And since you already know how to work with the HTML and the DOM, you already know how to use custom elements. So templates are a way to take this methodology that we're all used to using on the server side, where you have a data set and you maybe iterate over a data set, or you allow variables to get passed into dynamic elements on the page, and use them within your web app. This is really confusing. I'm going to just go off of this then. Or I should go back to mirroring. Anyway, try one more thing. Nope. Okay. So spec writers saw that everybody needed templates. The web browser spec writers saw everybody needed templates and said, why don't we make this part of the web platform? So this template tag is actually a DOM element, and the content is inert. So the shadow DOM is a way of encapsulating and scoping your CSS. So I've given this talk a couple times, and I'm always trying to fix it up, and I put these in the wrong spot. Anyway, I'll get to shadow DOM or the CSS scoping in just a second. This is shadow DOM. So everybody's put in a video tag on your site in HTML5. It's pretty easy to do this. You just declare a video. If you want, so you put this on your page, and it renders out a nice little video player. If you want to enable controls, you just add this controls attribute. Well, the browser makers have been holding out. These controls are actually the shadow DOM. So these are behind the scenes. If you enable View Shadow DOM in your developer console, you can inspect what's happening, what are the divs and what are the elements that are exposed through the shadow DOM. All right, so HTML imports is a way to reference and load web components. This allows us to, rather than declare every element that needs to be imported, reference other files and import kind of HTML declarations in the same way as you would, say, a PHP import, or other, on the server side, you would import declared objects. So you can take something like when you're using Bootstrap, on every single page you need to include these in your header in the right order. Using HTML imports, you can bring that down to just one file, one import. Now, one of the nice things that we're doing in Web Components is trying to keep everything atomic, and so you only import the parts you need. So you should be thinking at this point, okay, so you're telling me you've got a new framework that's going to make it a lot easier, but it's also atomic. This is a real app that ends up happening where you're importing in Polymer. You need to import the platform and then maybe core icons and the font that you want to use and paper fab. And anybody who was in the talk just previously, these are each server calls that need to be made, especially in a mobile app, a mobile device where latency might be an issue. This is poor performance. So there is, fortunately, with Polymer comes this little thing, I like to call it some Google pixie dust or Polymer pixie dust, which is not technically the Google project name. And so in the tool set, they have this, this tool called Vulcanize, which will, when you run the Vulcanize script from the command line on any file, it will go through and inspect any imports that are made through the entire application and import it into a single file. Now, that file ends up being pretty long, but it's only one web request. It also does some minification and some other cleanups. This can also be built into your build process. So there's a Vulcanize for Grunt, and Gulp makes your deploying to production a lot easier. So again, web components, there's 4 parts. There's custom elements, the templates, the shadow DOM, which scopes your CSS and encapsulates the markup, and your HTML imports. So those are kind of the 4 key aspects that make web components possible. All right, so got it? All right, so now what? Well, now that you have the idea of what a web component is, we need to find them. There's a number of resources. Customcomponents.io will search kind of the world of web components. They're pretty easy to find. The way the recommended kind of inclusion method is using Bower as a package manager. So using Bower, you install Core Toolbar, and it'll go through and find all the dependencies needed for any of these custom web elements, bring them into your project. You import the elements that you need in the head of your document, and then you use it. So one of the aspects that I kind of breezed over as I was confused looking left or right. With templates is one of the things about the custom element, when you declare the template, it's not actually stamped out onto the page. It's not rendered until you declare it. So when we import it, this allows the browser to know that the custom element is usable. And then to use it, this would be in the body of your HTML. You stamp out the core toolbar. And you get a pretty nice toolbar to use on your site. So, oops, did I go the wrong way? Nope. So find your custom elements, import, and use them. And the library handles the loading of all of the resources and all of the dependencies that it might need. So that's all custom elements, all part of the HTML5 spec. So now getting into Polymer, the kind of the topic of why we're here. So Polymer is a project built by the Google Chrome team to try and push the front edge of HTML5 and the standards to make web development easier and convenient for developers and much nicer for end users. So there's kind of 2 key reasons. What I see is there's 2 key reasons for using Polymer. There's the polyfills and the library of elements. So what are the polyfills? Well, the custom components are still kind of a new spec that are being adopted across all the browsers. This still pretty much stands. They've decided not to do imports, and I thought they weren't going to do, they did the other 3? Okay, well I need to update my slide then. So most modern web browsers are starting to adopt, this was just within the last month I think that Firefox announced, that they're adopting all but HTML imports. But we don't get to just, as web developers, we don't get to just choose what browser our users are viewing our site on. So by using this polyfill component, what it does, the first import that you do in your header is, say I'm going to use web components, and it goes through and it takes our compatibility from kind of the standard web component spec and makes it compatible across all browsers. So now we've got the ability to use our custom elements and know that it will work on all browsers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we would implement these custom elements. I'll show you first how to do it using kind of plain vanilla JavaScript, and then using Polymer as the markup. So to register an element with JavaScript, we declare the document register element, you give it a name and a prototype. With Polymer, kind of everything is declarative. So this is, I have this caveat, of course, because the Polymer is right now it's alpha. I think 0.8 version is the alpha release. It's all really new, and it's changing as we go. They just announced this 0.8 release a couple weeks ago, which breaks almost everything, not everything, breaks any app you're using with the existing version of Polymer. And in fact, their core documentation site has not fully adopted 0.8. So it's new, and there's some changes coming with 0.8. So I've got this caveat that this is how it's done. The actual syntax is a little different now. The methodology is the same. So you declare an element, give it a name, and that declares the element somewhere on your page, and then to use it, you need to declare its usage on your page. So we also talked about extending elements. Say you want to create a super button. You pass in the tag name. In JavaScript, you would say that it extends your button object, the standard HTML object. In Polymer, we just say that it extends that object. And this can be core elements or other Polymer elements as well. So you can start to extend existing ones that you've worked with. So you declare your button and say that it is a super button on the page. So these templates, in a vanilla web component, you use the template tag, and you reference its components, its elements with JavaScript. In Polymer, the standard is that everything is a template. So within the Polymer element, all of the content is within a template tag. You can nest templates, and it allows you to do data binding and some iterations and other fun things. So this shadow DOM element in plain JavaScript, you would create a shadow root and fill it with HTML or inner HTML, and then you can mark it up and modify your elements. In Polymer, by default, everything is within its own shadow DOM. And I've got an example a little bit later that I think we'll talk more about why that's important. So now, components. So we talked about this core set of components that we have as web developers to make our sites awesome. If we could think about redoing that now and take our elements and make them more declarative and more explanatory as we're using them, it might make it easier for us developers. So we're going to do an example here of taking a simple contact info and converting this to a Polymer element. So we've got an image, H2, H3. Now, if you wanted to modify this to look a little fancier, you would never in your CSS file say, okay, all H2, I want H2s to be orange. And any image tag, slide left, because that's too broad of a scope. Within the, if we if we declare it as a Polymer element, that creates the shadow DOM, and now we can start to declare CSS markup on these root elements that you would never in your life touch as a, not in your life, but it's not good practice to start modifying H2s or image tags across the whole site. So now if we bring this into a Polymer element, again, it doesn't get used until we stamp it out on the page. So we define it across the top and then stamp it out somewhere. And now if we reference a style sheet, we can say float left with an image, say make the H2 blue and bold, and do some fiddling with pretty basic elements, and it's not going to bleed out into the rest of your site. You're not going to be chasing down which CSS declaration did I declare in which line of which CSS file. It makes that a lot easier. Now what we can also do is we can if we move this into a div and declare attributes. So what we did across the top in the name, so we've got an attribute of image, which is like a variable that we could pass into the element. So when we declare the usage of it, we say the image is equal to the value that we're using. And then there's also this special content area. So this content is whatever we put inside the tag here. So we've got, now we've got a template that's reusable across, say, a bunch of content, contact cards that we might be using. All right, so that's kind of using polyfills and templates. Now, one of the more exciting parts, I think, is this library of elements. So we've all, through the different sessions we've been in today, you know, we're all kind of tired of seeing these charts where we all know that desktop traffic is being outpaced by mobile traffic to everybody's site. So what if we were able to design our HTML and our sites with mobile in mind? What if we were able to start over again? So most folks expect our sites to feel like an app, a native mobile app. And we're developing native mobile, and web apps are becoming this kind of a common expected experience that users are starting to feel. So what the Polymer team has done is gone through and collected a bunch of kind of standard interactions and provided them to us in this library of pre-built web components. And then they have a look and feel like we're expecting on iOS or Android. So they've got items like a core icon, a core field. So these are their names within the library of Polymer elements. There's a set of general purpose kind of utility elements that come with. So there's a basic container for building your tabs or your buttons. Like any custom element, first you import the definition in the top, and then we use it in the app. So here we're importing a core toolbar, then we're saying we've got a My App. If we also import a core icon set, we've got a set of kind of standardized icons that web users are used to seeing, like the hamburger menu, search icon, a standard set of icons to pull from. So another core element is this, the common pattern is to nest this core toolbar in another element called the core header panel with a header section on top and a content, which is a good place to put our elements here, and a content section below here. And so together we've got these, and well, my notes are out of sync. Anyhow, so we've got our content section below, and by default it'll pin that header section to the top and allow you to scroll through the content of your site in a nice and fluid manner. You can also modify the toolbar with a declaration, and you'll notice the header, the toolbar will scroll away with the page when they scroll up. So another common multi-device web responsive design is this called the core drawer panel. So on a nice wide screen, it's got this kind of navigation area on the right here with the content, the content on the right. On a mobile device, that will hide by default when you're not using it and will swipe out from the left. So another collection of items that are in this library of documents, last year at Google I/O, Google announced their design standards, which is this material design. So there's a whole suite of web components that come with this material design baked into them. They're called the paper elements. So with a paper element, we've got something as simple as your paper input, which allows a pretty nice UX experience for your users, which will do things like validation, give your error information in a compact and usable way across different devices. You notice, right, to use this, I'm not writing any JavaScript or adding any CSS. So we got standard things like a checkbox that they've reimagined for the current year, checkbox and input, paper fab buttons. One of the nice elements that's nice to use to some extent, I've seen lots of sites that overuse this paper ripple. You can drop this paper ripple element within a container. So here, with that fit attribute, it fills the entire div. And now any touch event, either click or finger touch, will give this ripple effect on that card. The paper shadow, a way of giving some visual depth to the element, to give it to feel of the different layers on the page. So styling, by default, it comes with a kind of standard set of styling of colors and layout. We can modify them by adding a pseudo element, which is part of the shadow DOM, and say change the default color of some elements. There's a way with the shadow DOM to pierce all of the shadow DOMs, which is declaring this deep tag in your CSS, which will pierce all of the shadow DOMs on your site. So if you do want to make a global change to a markup across all of your custom elements, you can do that with this markup. So it allows you to kind of change all of the elements across all of your sites. So there's a project out on the Polymer projects called their Topeka app, which is kind of their flagship project where they've combined all of the elements, all of these Polymer elements into a pretty usable app. It's a little quiz app where you have to answer some questions. And it looks really nice on a desktop device or a mobile device. And that's all built with Polymer and custom elements. Oh, so here's the kind of a walkthrough of that. So we don't have time to touch on all of the elements that are available, but definitely head over to polymerproject.org, where there's a talk about the library of all of the elements that are available. So one of the nice things is that the Google team is not alone. They're not the only ones developing a library of components using these the custom elements. So Mozilla has a project called Mozilla Brick, where they've got similar set of elements that are developed in the Polymer library. So they've got the Brick app bar and a deck and a Brick tab bar. Now, one of the great things about this is that they're interusable. So if you have a Mozilla custom element on a page, you're not excluded from using a Polymer custom element. That's the beauty of the scoping and the encapsulation of these custom elements. So This is an example of swapping out for the Polymer's core icon and another open custom element of Instagram. And they can all work together instead of being siloed into one framework that you have to choose from the beginning. So these are not just, is that the time? All right, I'm doing fine. So not just the browser makers, there's a number of other components that are web design resources that are being made into custom web components. So you can, there's a project called App Router, which will allow you to do custom routing within your application using that web component. There's Pager, there's Ajax Forms. And you can build full-blown apps running on Polymer. So the entire Polymer project is built using these components, using Polymer elements. There's other projects within the Google team. The Chromium dashboard has lots of custom web components. There's a kind of inception element where there's a designer. There's a web-based designer tool where you can build custom elements, all built with custom elements that you can build and drag and design your site. If we have time, I might be able to walk through a little bit of a demo. So there's lots of sites are starting to use these web components. So GitHub even, the 5 minutes ago little flag that's on the page is a web component. So it's not just Google. As I've given this demo a couple of times, someone came up to me and said that Salesforce actually has extended that custom component builder, and within their internal tool, that's what they're used to build out. They do some the developer tools for Salesforce. I'm obviously not an expert in that. Anybody here use the Salesforce tool? Okay, good. Then it's awesome. You should check it out, and it's all web components. So another thing that this enables us to do is to take APIs as elements. So we're all web developers, right? One of the things that's pretty common is to add a Google map, right? Oh, could you just add this as a Google map? Yeah, of course, we can do this, right? There's so much code just to add a map on your site, just to get even a marker on a map. Well, by taking this open API, a standard API of Google Maps, and converting it into a web component, it's now just a simple Polymer element, or sorry, even just a web component. So now we've got a Google map, and we can do things like center it on a latitude and longitude. We could zoom in to a zoom level there. And adding something like a marker, which, it's just a marker, right? We just want to put a pin on a map. We can do this. I've done it 100 times. It's trivial now by adding just a marker element within your Google Map item. So the Polymer team has gone through all of the teams within Google that provide these, the Google APIs, and tried to convert the APIs that are available to us developers as custom components. So these all live out on a GitHub project of Google Web Components. You can search them. So there's some really makes using a lot of these APIs, which they're totally doable, right? We're all really smart web developers. We'll just figure it out. Working with the calendar API, also a nightmare, right? Just a couple lines of code now. You can show some elements of your calendar. Login, something is getting your Google login enabled for a page. So there's a couple of sites. So I think this is a link. I've posted these slides on my Twitter and my Google Plus as well. So Adi Osmani is one of the kind of lead folks on the Google Web Dev team, and he's got a couple site videos, one of which is getting started with web components and building your own custom element. And so this is kind of an invitation to join the revolution, to learn how to build them. There's resources like webcomonents.org. This is, again, not a Google project. This is an open source consortium, and lots of people in this field are posting here. This is probably where to stay current on topics in web components. And it's new. It's still being figured out. So it's a great time to get into it and be part of making it a usable experience for us all. The Polymer project is a great site. This is where most of the Polymer elements are, polymerproject.org. One thing I can't say enough good things about is Rob Dodson, one of my current modern day tech heroes, has a series called Polycasts. So I think he's had about 15 of them. They're definitely manageable. They're about 8 minutes long. And he'll take a single topic of developing with web components or Polymer elements and kind of walk through what is the core list item. How do we make a core list item work and extend on that? So I highly recommend that. And then build. There's a seed element. So to build your own custom element, you would go out to GitHub and start with this seed element and replicate from that. So this is the this is the link to this to the video of walking through how to use that seed element. There's a couple other tools. So this talk was started last fall. The Polymer team tried to really promote the launch of this new initiative. And so this talk is stemmed from this Polymer Polytechnic, which are these shirts I have, mostly in medium left now. And as part of that, there's also a side project, this Google Dev Editor. Depending on time, I'll talk through this. So this Dev Editor is a Chrome extension that is really a kind of a fully usable IDE for developing sites within your Chrome browser. And it allows you to test your site locally without needing to install Node and make sure you have your package manager running well, which for most of us, you should anyway. You should start there and get involved in this. But if not, this Chrome Dev Editor is great. So once you've built a custom element, how do we, the best thing to do is to share it with the world. And so this customelements.io that we referenced earlier, to find elements, in your Bower file, if you just add the web components keyword and publish it on GitHub, it'll be found and be available for the rest of us to use. So, oh good, that's not mirroring over there. So explore these elements, have an open mind. There's, like I said, it's new, and with the version that we're on now, it's changing. So I wanted to talk through a demo here, and then we'll see how this works in my non-mirrored screens. I'll just unmirror. Or not. All right, so another quiz. You don't have to answer this if you don't like to. Anybody use Yik Yak? No? Oh, good. Anybody know what Yik Yak is? Yeah, a couple folks. So it's an anonymous social networking posting service where you post anonymously, but it's geolocated. So it will show kind of posts from people who are near you, but it doesn't. It's weird. Anyway, so I work at a higher ed institution, and lots of folks in administration in higher ed are really anxious about this because as any anonymous internet thing, it is abused and not savory in some points. So, but it's really interesting. So what I did is I went on GitHub and I found an API hack to get into the data of Yik Yak, and then launch this. So like I said, I work at Macalester College, and so I think, yeah, they've stopped my API hack from working. But so I have a cached version that when it was working. So these are all the geolocations of yaks, I think is the term. And you can click on these. Now, this is always dangerous to do if in a public demo. All right. Yeah. Whew. So. All right. So these are, someone had some things to say about that. Let's try. All right. Right. They're pretty interesting. Now, to make this work, I'm going to open with holding a mic. Oh no, I'll do. All right. So the code behind here. All it does is in the top, I import the web components. And then I say that I'm going to use the Google Maps. See if I make this a little bigger. All right, so I'm going to import the Bower component of a Google Map. Then when I get it started, all I say basically is I am using a Google Map centered on this lat long at this zoom level. And then each drop, each marker, let's stop somewhere that's not too censored, is just a Google Map marker with a latitude and longitude. This title, oh boy. All right. So so that title element is if you float over the tag, you can have it say something. So I had it just have the timestamp. And then if you click on it, that's what shows up in the bubble. And again, to go from, if anybody has built a web app, okay, there we go. Right, just to get the marker and to have a decent, to get the text inside the bubble look nice, you can do full HTML markup inside here, and it'll look great. I mean, talk about simple. This was about a 10-minute project, a proof of concept project. So here's basically what it was. This was built using MVC.NET, and so this is just basically in the layout file. I import the web component. Then on the page itself, I import only the page that's using the Google Map. I import this element, and then I iterate over for each item in the collection. I stamp out a Google Map marker with the latitude and longitude. It really could not, oh boy, could not have been much easier. All right. So another item that I'd like to share is this meetup element. So I talked about on, Bower.io. So if you want to make this a little bigger, search packages. I gave this demo to our Google developer group, and one of our regular members came up and said, "Oh, this sounds great. Let's make an element. What should we make?" And so one of the things we do is we run all of our sites off of Meetup. And so in less than a week, he and I had built this element, this Meetup element, which is now available for anybody to use. You can go to it, its location on Meetup element. You can import this into your project with just a Bower import Meetup element, and it'll bring the site, all of the pieces you need. We'll use this on our, all right, GGTC. Make this a little bigger. So this is a site that we built. I'm not a designer, but this is using all Polymer elements. We've got across the left side here, we don't have our future meetups planned. But this will show all upcoming meetups for our site. And the code behind is, again, just importing this meetup element, passing in a developer key, and then it'll go fetch the data from the meetup API and show that on your page. And then you can click on this and see any upcoming meetups. So I have here at the end a quick talk of, what are we at? A little bit of time still. So Polymer 0.8, the Polymer project is an experiment. And with the 0.8 release, they've kind of decided, okay, this is moving beyond experiment phase and into kind of pre-production. So 0.8 is the alpha release of Polymer. One of the things that the Polymer team, I think, has been really great about is being honest and looking at issues in an open way. There's a lot of power in web components, and these polyfills really help make things easier, but they were not performant, especially on mobile Safari. It really kind of bogged down the user experience, and that's contrary to kind of what we're trying to do as good web developers. We want to have nice, fast, responsive pages. And so these are the benchmarks they had for the 0.5 release. And now with the 0.8, you can see they've got, for desktop, Firefox is an 8x improvement. Mobile Safari is a 5x improvement. So they really are moving in the right direction with this. It does kind of build a number of the things. But for now, because the 0.8 really is, they're still kind of rolling out a lot of the tutorials. If you pin your elements, so in the Bower file, if you say that where it's pinned to the 0.5.5, you should be fine. Some folks on a lot of the discussion boards were really furious when they would pin to the master. Again, one of the nice things about the Polymer team is they're developing everything kind of really out in the open. So their master branch on GitHub is kind of the last minute's commits, and it may or may not break everything on your site. So even when 0.8 is fully released, you'll want to pin to a particular release. But all of the tutorials and the projects that the It's Hackademic site, I think I referenced that at the beginning, or that's the next slide. So this link, itshackademic.com, has a bunch of great tutorials that they have that were built to kind of get people up to speed using Polymer. And they have the time that, approximate time that it might take. I found it's a little bit less or a little bit more, depending on your experience in web development. So we've got, I think I'm supposed to end now to give a nice transition time. I could walk through a demo. I like to walk through one of these demos to show kind of how easy it is, or I could also answer some questions. Any questions about Polymer? Oh, yeah.
So I realize this is pretty high level. Didn't touch on like model reduce or MDB like binding syntax at all. But like what? So you have these high level components, they're super awesome. But how do you pass state in between like two separate disparate components on the page? Or like what are some tools?
Yeah, I kind of glossed over a lot of the data binding parts. The other piece of a standard Polymer element has by default it has the template, and then there's also where you would do the markup, and then there's the script. So the script you could either do for the whole page or a site, and that script is the JavaScript element is what handles kind of passing the data or will register the data awareness between the different elements on a page. The markup is similar to something like Angular, so they don't, because they're similar, they don't. That's one spot where they don't play specifically well together. But there is a Angular Polymer project which is melding the two together, and there's other ways of managing that. A number of these examples will get you into data binding. In a more simplistic way, it does get tricky when you're passing one data aware element and its objects to another.
Yeah, so with like, I'm sorry, but anyways, with React, you know, like the idea is that you hold all of your state in one place, and then you're just passing data down into the components. So all they're ever doing is rendering based on the properties that you pass into them.
Right.
things like that. It's been a while since I looked at the project.
Yeah, it is different in that way, and there's elements of that I don't have my head fully wrapped around either. Yeah.
So to help kind of differentiate Polymer and web components, so say you don't care about compatibility, if you require all your users to use Pro something, is there any reason to use Polymer then? If you just straight up
The library of components.
could you just refresh my memory like
The paper elements or the paper input.
that's Polymer, not necessarily web components.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So those are Polymer elements built using web components. So web components are what make the Polymer elements possible. You could recreate your own paper element, and it's all open source. You could yank out the innards if you want and make your own. Yeah.
You're comparing the speeds between 0.5 and 0.8. How does that compare by not using it all? I mean, what's the benchmark you're going against? For like Bootstrap or something like that. I mean, if you're starting a new site with it, I mean, what can you expect to be like the performance overhead? Or is it per component based or?
That's a great question. I don't know that'd be a great experiment to run. To have a fully marked up site, because it's one thing just to load like a really boring HTML, and then what are those benchmarks? Because they were in load time was the graph that they had posted, not in comparative load.
I'm just curious, like if you started using this, what is the performance overhead?
There is a little overhead. Well, it's not, so the amount of users isn't going to bog down the user's experience. It's really on because it's all browser side. It's all client side to render it. It's not going to overload the server. Was there another question? All right. Thanks, everybody.